Raw debuts on Netflix, but why is The Rock hugging Cody Rhodes? And both John Cena and Roman Reigns declare for the Royal Rumble, but should either one of them win? It's time to roll around the ring. The Netflix era has begun in WWE, kicking off with Raw in Los Angeles. And outside of Triple H, it was The Rock kicking off things for Raw. And no, not the final boss. It was Babyface Rock, maybe, and it had everyone up in arms. He went even as far as to shout out Cody Rhodes, who was in the front row, embracing Cody Rhodes in the front row, and everyone's like, hold on, what the hell am I watching? What did we forget everything that took place last year leading up to WrestleMania? Did we forget that after WrestleMania, The Rock challenged Cody Rhodes to a potential one-on-one match? And here they are cracking jokes, and leave it to The Rock to do exactly what they did last year, and that is see the response on social media, and then the next night on NXT, call everybody out for it and think that's going to smooth everything over and make it all make sense, and it doesn't do that. Now, my issue is not with The Rock. I completely understand why they went this route, right? Raw and WWE coming over to Netflix, they fully anticipated having casual fans who either have not watched wrestling since at least the Attitude Era, or maybe have never watched wrestling, and since basically everyone has Netflix, they're checking it out now. The most recognizable face that they could put out there is The Rock. I mean, Moana just came out and everyone knows him as Dwayne The Rock Johnson, the movie star. So who else would you want to introduce a new crowd, a new audience to your platform than The Rock? And of course, doing that, The Rock couldn't come out and be the heel that is making fun of everybody and taking shots at the crowd the way he was last year with the Bloodline. I'm completely okay and completely understand that. And he could have even shouted out Cody Rhodes, give him a shout out for being the face of the company and carrying the company as their champion. My issue is with Cody Rhodes. Why is he even in the front row? Yeah, sure, he's going to be at the Raw debut on Netflix, but why is he at the front row for the Rock segment, smiling at the Rock, laughing at the Mama Rhodes joke, being there for that embrace? My issue is with Cody Rhodes, because you don't need to explain to me that everything is scripted, but this is all taking place on WWE TV, and you could have had the Rock do what he did without losing the belief that the animosity is still there on Cody Rhodes' side for everything the Rock has done in the past. So if and when you wanted to bring this rivalry up, it is believable that Cody Rhodes still hates The Rock and still wants to get his hands on The Rock for everything he did to his family. That is all on Cody Rhodes. It is not The Rock's fault for doing what he did, because he needed to. The Netflix bosses were there, celebrities were there. He needed to do that. Cody Rhodes did not need to be there, and that is the side of things that I have an issue with. And I'm going as far as to say I don't need to see this Rock Cody match. I don't know that I ever need to see it. The Rock handing Roman the Ulafala after his win, that made all the sense in the world, and I think that's the focus if The Rock is focused on WWE moving forward in 2025. I'm more interested in everything Cody Rhodes has going on involving Kevin Owens, potentially a Randy Orton return, and there's so many other names you could have in Cody Rhodes' title reign that I'd rather see, and potentially even take the title off Cody, that I'd rather see than a match with The Rock. I think this kind of put the nail in the coffin for me of ever wanting to see a Rock Cody match. I'm good with Rock Roman and Cody versus anyone else that does not involve the Bloodline. And I was proven wrong, because Triple H had CM Punk and Seth Rollins main event this show. Many, including myself, thought it would be Roman and Solo because of The Rock's potential involvement. But I love the option to have these two main event because of how big of a deal it was. And I love the call to have CM Punk go over. I said it leading into the match that Punk was the bigger name between the two in terms of promoting WWE's debut to Netflix. Of course, still a big deal for the national media and, again, the casual fans to realize that he is back in the WWE. So it makes all the sense in the world for him to go over, but this feud can still be a trilogy. I've also talked about Seth Rollins potentially going heel, teaming up with a Kevin Owens and or Drew McIntyre, who have similar issues with CM Punk and the Bloodline that Seth Rollins does. This loss can only add to that. You got to remember how much Seth Rollins genuinely hates CM Punk and how much they played into that for this story. So it's not believable that Seth Rollins would then finally have a chance to get his hands on CM Punk and then lose on the big stage like the Raw debut on Netflix and just be okay with it and just move on and do something else. If we're going to move on from this storyline. In a world that we do that, I don't think you should. Seth Rollins needs to win the Royal Rumble or the Elimination Chamber to have a world title shot at WrestleMania. That is the only way it's believable for Seth Rollins to be okay taking this loss without wanting a rematch with CM Punk and continuing this story. It's the perfect route to have Seth snap, whether it's with a faction or not, go heel and continue this story that could end at WrestleMania. Unless Seth Rollins is going for a title, that's the route to go. But for now, it was the right call to have Punk go over. Also on the Raw debut on Netflix, John Cena declaring for the Royal Rumble match to kick off his farewell tour. It makes all the sense in the world, his final Royal Rumble. So I absolutely love having the big star power in that match in terms of Cena. And he started off on the negative side of things when it comes to him potentially not having a world title run in this final year. And I'm going to start on the negative side of things to say, I don't think he should win this Royal Rumble match at all. I don't think he should win the Elimination Chamber. I don't need him to be in the world title picture through WrestleMania season. I don't mind if we give him the record at some point this year, but I'd rather see John Cena do something a little different. And he seems to be very open to be doing something different throughout this final year. And for me, different is, how about the Intercontinental title, right? Braun Breaker, that'd be a great feud. Maybe not for WrestleMania, but at some point to have John Cena go for a title, not only that he's never held, but he's never even been involved in the IC title picture. This is a guy, when he was in the mid-card, he held the US title, he went straight to the WWE title, and he never looked back. He never even went for this IC title, if more than once. From my memory, I can't remember even once. So for him to do something different like that, I'd rather see him do something along those lines for this final run, along with names that maybe he hasn't been able to have a program with, rather than just going back to the world title picture. I think the Royal Rumble match is the perfect way to start a potential WrestleMania feud. In that match, whether it's a returning name or somebody on the roster, there's so many names, whether it's old feuds he's had or people he's never had programs with, that he could potentially have a huge match with during this final run, specifically for WrestleMania. The Royal Rumble match is the perfect way to do that, but it should not involve the world title just yet. And Rhea Ripley taking the women's world title off of Liv Morgan on the Raw debut on Netflix. And I'm never going to complain about Rhea Ripley going over and being a champion, because she deserves it. She is over as ever. She's at the top of her game, and she's at the top of the women's division. But I am going to complain in the sense of she doesn't need it. And Liv Morgan definitely does. Liv has become a star holding that title. We've seen her all over the place, media appearances. We've seen so many other superstars in interviews talking her up and how much of a star she's become. But I don't believe that she has become a star where she doesn't need that title. That title is what made people realize how much of a star she was. And I don't think we had enough of that, especially going in to WrestleMania season. And I worry what this means for her moving forward. Is her story just going to be continuing to chase Rhea Ripley over and over again? Are her and Dom still together after Dom tried to get back with Rhea, right? Can she hold her own in terms of a non-title women's feud going into WrestleMania? And I feel like, oh, sure, we have a mid-card title and the IC title coming up for the women's division. But after what we've seen from Liv Morgan, that seems, and it feels like, a legitimate step back for her to go into a title picture like that, or obviously the tag titles. Rhea Ripley does not need a title. She could have gotten away with losing this match, whether Liv cheated or whatever it may have been, and she could have had a non-title women's feud of some sort going into WrestleMania. And that's just something I feel like the women's division lacks. I like the mid-card titles. They've gotten the tag titles, but we've never seen really consistent non-title women's feuds on a big stage going into something like a WrestleMania. Every story around every big name in the women's division is around being champion. It would help the division to tell a story like we saw from a CM Punk and Drew McIntyre over the last year, to that level. And a Rhea Ripley is the perfect name to do it. This was the perfect time and opportunity to do it, to continue to create a new star in Liv Morgan by keeping the title on her, and let Rhea Ripley show how big of a star she is by proving I don't need a title and I can still go put on a huge match at WrestleMania without a title involved. That would have been huge for Rhea Ripley, and it would have been huge for the women's division. This was the wrong call to have Rhea Ripley go over. And I got to bring this up, Hulk Hogan getting booed out of the building in Los Angeles on the Raw debut on Netflix. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I will say, for people reacting to this, thinking this is politically driven in terms of who Hulk Hogan supports and votes for and whatever it may be, I will remind you that The Undertaker came out right before to celebrate with Rhea Ripley, and as Undertaker always does, gets a very, very loud ovation. And I will remind you that Undertaker, along with Kane, very openly supports the same person that Hulk Hogan does when it comes to politics. Actually, nothing to do about the political side of things. It has more to do with the fact that racist people will get booed. Right? We are at that point in the world, which is nice. I felt warm when it comes to humanity to see Hulk Hogan get booed like this. I'll be very honest with you, and I will tell you straight up, it has nothing to do with the politics of it. It has nothing to do with his politics. It has a lot more to do with him being the human being that he is, the racist human being that he is, and racist people will always get that reaction, should always get that reaction. So those trying to push the political narrative clearly didn't turn on Raw until after the Rhea Ripley match to see The Undertaker get the reaction he got. So I will leave it there. Hulk Hogan, that was not the right call. I don't know what reaction they were expecting for him. I understand the history he has in wrestling, and he's a big part of it. Having him a part of the pre-taped packages like we saw at the beginning of Raw is fine, but I don't know what other reaction they expected for a Hulk Hogan live appearance in Los Angeles the way that he saw last week. Going back to the Royal Rumble, Roman Reigns declaring for the Royal Rumble match. On SmackDown, Paul Heyman letting Cody Rhodes know that Roman Reigns wants his title back, and that's fine. The story is there for Roman, of course, after getting his Ulafala back. It only makes sense that he wants to target Cody Rhodes. I love the star power, the big names in the Royal Rumble match. So this makes all the sense in the world. But again, I'll go back to what I said about John Cena. Roman Reigns should not win this match and most likely will not. We do not need another Cody Roman match. It's okay to tease that because of how big of a deal it has been over the last couple of years. But Roman Reigns declaring for this match told me that The Rock should be in the Royal Rumble match this year. And I don't know that he declares for it ahead of time. He could be a surprise entrant to surprise Roman and potentially start that WrestleMania feud between Rock and Roman in the Royal Rumble match. If he is going to declare ahead of time, the earliest I would do this is the January 27th episode of Raw. Roman Reigns let Paul Heyman know that's when he wants his acknowledgement ceremony to be, the last Raw on Netflix before the Royal Rumble. I could see The Rock interrupting that. I don't know if he turns on Roman Reigns there, but to at least let him know that he's going to be in the Royal Rumble match as well. The Roman Reigns declaring for this match has nothing to do with him winning it. It has more to do with The Rock most likely being in it. And Tiffany Stratton had her first appearance as women's champion on SmackDown, and they built up the challengers as you do for a new title reign as to who she will defend it against. They had a fatal four-way, had her look strong, taking out all four of them. Absolutely love that. The one thing that stood out to me, though, is I don't know if Tiffany Stratton realizes that she's kind of a babyface here. She's at least over with the crowd, and her promos need to start reflecting it. They went through and showed a whole video package of all the excitement over the fact that she is now champion. She slowly was turning babyface and getting over with the crowd way back in the Elimination Chamber, but especially when she started to show signs of getting sick of Nia Jax and getting ready to turn on her. And then we saw the reaction she got last week when she cashed in. She shows up, she gets a loud ovation, and then she gets on the mic and she's cutting a heel promo. And it seems very tone deaf in terms of what's going on around you, right? Are you not paying attention to the fact that you're getting cheered and yet you're telling people to put respect on your name and I'm all your favorites, I'm better than all your favorites, right? And yet we're cheering you. So I understand Tiffany Stratton has been a heel for most of her main roster run over the last year. And of course, going back to her NXT run, but she needs to realize she's a babyface. Her promos need to reflect it because otherwise it's going to start getting a little awkward when you're getting these loud ovations and then speaking into the mic as if you're getting booed out of the arena, as if you're Dominic Mysterio. Tiffany Stratton, you are over with the crowd. You need to start acting like it because your title run could be something special. It's off to a great start, and she doesn't need to be the babyface that just aligns herself with all the babyfaces and goes against the heels. She's facing Bayley next week, and that's fine, right? Bianca Belair will step up to anyone that gets in her face, and we know Bianca Belair is a star. Rhea Ripley is the same way. Tiffany Stratton can have that same vibe, but when it comes to getting on the mic, if you're talking to the crowd as if they're booing you and they're cheering you, something is always going to be off in those promos. Something was off in that promo on SmackDown, and she needs to kind of switch that up just a little bit. Doesn't need to be too babyface, but needs to realize that she's over with the crowd. Moving on to AEW, and Powerhouse Hobbs won the Casino Gauntlet match. He will challenge Jon Moxley in Cincinnati on Dynamite for the world title. Before I even go any further, but anything I'm about to say has nothing to do with Powerhouse Hobbs. I'm a huge fan of him. I'm a huge fan of his look and everything he's done since his return. But this makes absolutely no sense one bit. This screams Tony Khan putting in a random name generator to book his show and to book his world title match. Because we've talked in recent weeks that the amount of stuff going on around Jon Moxley, it hasn't gotten out of hand in terms of being too cluttered, but it could get there. And now we've gotten there because you have a whole Casino Gauntlet match to decide who's going to challenge Moxley. You are telling stories with 4 or 5 different people, quality stories in terms of who could challenge Moxley for this world title for it to make sense and everything that Moxley is doing with the Death Riders. Adam Copeland's not even in this match. Orange Cassidy, Jay White, Darby Allin could have come back and won it. Obviously, Danielson's still out. Christian Cage has a contract. We've said all this in the past, and you have all these quality stories going on, so you're going to go up and down who could potentially win this Casino Gauntlet, and Powerhouse Hobbs comes from literally out of nowhere, having nothing to do, no story behind this, and getting a world title shot while you're telling stories with 5 other people in this world title picture. This makes absolutely no sense. Moxley's still telling a story with Copeland as soon as Collision, and yet now Hobbs is just involved in this. And let's add into the fact, and again, nothing against Hobbs, but he just lost in a title match against Takeshita at World's End. So he failed in a mid-card title match. And the next step is a world title shot that he had nothing to do with in terms of the story. This makes absolutely no sense. Of course, Moxley is going to retain. I'm a huge fan of Hobbs, but he has no business being in this match. One positive side from Dynamite, how about Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega teaming up against the Don Callis family? Kenny Omega showing up on Dynamite after his return match in Tokyo, Japan, which that made all the sense in the world. We know how special Japan is for Kenny Omega. So for that to be his first match back, I love that for him. Love to see him healthy and back in action. And I love this story. There's so much good about it. It makes all the sense in the world. I love the reaction of Kenny Omega when Don Callis came out, not even letting him get in the word with how hateable he is and how punchable of a face he has. And that's the perfect reaction. And Will Ospreay, the history that Will Ospreay not only has with the Don Callis family, but with Kenny Omega and the big stars, and how big of a feel it has to have those two in the ring together, potentially teaming up moving forward. You can have some special pay-per-view matches out of this story if it's handled well. But the biggest winner of this whole story is going to be Kyle Fletcher. His stock continues to rise as a single star since joining Don Callis. He already has a win over Will Ospreay. He had a good showing in the Continental Classic. They have handled him so well, and now he is going to be the leader of the main faction going against 2 names like Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay. And he doesn't even need to get wins in this feud to help his stock and help his credibility in AEW. This is a big deal for him, and he will continue to rise as a single star because of this story, just for the lone fact that he is most likely going to be on a pay-per-view card with both Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega. That is huge for Kyle Fletcher, and it also does a nice job to kind of, give us a little bit of gap between Omega and Okada's stare down at World's End, and when we could potentially get that match. I said it before, we should hold off and let that drag out a little bit, and this is the perfect filler before we get to that Omega-Okada match in AEW. And the Women's Casino Gauntlet is coming up, and the winner will challenge Mariah May at Grand Slam in Australia. Shout out to AEW for reminding themselves that, hey, we do, in fact, have a pay-per-view before Revolution in March. Chris Statlander getting the win for the top spot in the Casino Gauntlet. I got to see Toni Storm win this. I think this is the perfect story to tell going in to Grand Slam with Mariah May because of the history that Toni Storm and Mariah May have, and because of the version of Toni Storm that we have seen since she's been back, completely forgetting that she's had a whole AEW career, or whatever this is, a whole different side of her, a different personality, whatever it is. And the story, the segments, the promos that her and Mariah May can tell leading into Grand Slam of frustrating Mariah May by not remembering any of their history together, their rivalry, their Wembley Stadium match, everything that they had going on in 2024. And Toni Storm is going to act like this rookie that is a huge fan of Mariah May and just excited to have this title match. And the big part of it too is that type of story should see Toni Storm lose, because it's going to add to that character, because afterwards, just seeing her reaction to losing and coming up just short in her first title match, it will continue to be good. It will continue to frustrate Mariah May. And it's a good way to give Mariah May a solid title defense on a pay-per-view to add to her title reign. I know Toni Storm talked about losing this past week to Statlander and what it should mean. Well, I think it should show up in Cincinnati when it comes to this Casino Gauntlet match, have her bounce back with the win and tell this story with Mariah May going into Australia. And lastly, the Hurt Syndicate showing up, letting Private Party know they want the tag team titles. And I'm all for this. They have been pretty quiet, a little quieter than we expected when they showed up in AEW. And of course, gold is the perfect way to make a faction look legitimate. Bobby Lashley, Shelton Benjamin, MVP, we know they are legitimate as a faction, and now they need to start being treated like that. And again, they've been a little quieter than we've expected. They haven't added the third member just yet. So now is the time to put the gold on Lashley and Shelton Benjamin. I will say you need to kind of drag this out a little bit, maybe to Revolution in March at least, so we're not taking the titles off Private Party too quick. We're already telling this story. They got a 6-man tag coming up involving Mark Briscoe in Cincinnati, which is fine, but I would hold off on having this title match just so Private Party can have a run of a few months before dropping this title, because whenever this match does happen between the Hurt Syndicate and Private Party, it is a must win for the Hurt Syndicate. They need to take these titles off Private Party whenever this match happens, because if they were to lose the Private Party, their credibility goes right down the drain as a faction. And is not a knock on Private Party. The Hurt Syndicate has not had the impact we expected them to have when Bobby Lashley showed up late last year in AEW and reformed what we knew as the Hurt Business in WWE. This is the perfect opportunity to get gold on them and start their rise as a faction. They need to win this match whenever it does take place. Roar Around the Ring is available every week. Find us on YouTube at Roar Around the Ring. I'm Justin Valentine. We'll talk to you guys very soon.